Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, for episode number 177, I think. The 176 got pulled because I mentioned we talked about the Twisted Sister clip, and Google blocked it in a bunch of countries, and I argued, hey, this is fair use. I'm talking about the thing I credited on the screen. I didn't use any of the music. Haven't heard back from them yet, so I don't know what's going on with that. I do know that with 100,000 YouTube subscribers, seems odd that latest firewall did 14,000 views in a week or something like that. I don't know what the status of the Prager lawsuit is. I get the feeling that they wouldn't have filed the suit if they didn't feel like there's a pretty strong claim. I don't know anything about the law in that kind of detail, other than to say that if they win, then I don't know. I just think there should be just a class action lawsuit brought by a bunch of people. So anyway, I've had better weeks. This time last week I was in Chicago trying to do a little good, and I bet that was a bit of a shock for me. I don't really know what else to say about it at this point. It's coming from your own team. It's my first thought was it just seemed to add so much credibility to this thing. You know, when somebody on your own team is basically saying, well, we don't want to be seen with you. We're going to wash our hands of you because of your horrible racism. The whole thing basically came from Media Matters, which gets paid millions, if not billions of dollars by George Soros to go through pretty much everything they can find and to do things like this kind of character assassination. We're going through everything that I said on, not just on the Molyneux interview, but on the one that I thought he was talking about. We're looking at all of them. I went through the transcript of the one where we talked about race and IQ there, and I didn't see a lot of the quotes, so it's possible that there's stuff on someone on other episodes. We're looking into those. Tell you what I did see though. I saw paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of statements that are essentially just exactly to the opposite of what they said I said. And furthermore, I suspect I'm going to make sure that everything that they put in direct quotes was a direct quote. But the one thing that is without question is the fact that when Media Matters put together that list of these things that I said in such a way to make me sound like such a white supremacist, they had to skip over huge amounts of stuff where I say basically just the opposite. The thrust of it is, in a nutshell, is that the Media Matters cut and the campaign's reaction and everybody else's reaction, because it's a fun thing to wake up one morning and see 6 Google pages of your name in the Charlotte newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, being called a white supremacist with the same cut and paste article in all of them. That's a different point, but it's another point. You know, you would think that before you could make an accusation like that, you might at least want to give me a call. You would just think that if you were a reporter for a newspaper, you would at least give me a call. You know, then I could explain to you exactly how I feel about all these things. But that doesn't happen. It didn't happen. So, Anyway, a couple things I'll say about this, and I guess we'll move on. First of all, I do all my thinking out loud. That's my job. I think out loud, and I talk about the things that I'm thinking about. And this used to be called a free country. And the idea was that you could discuss ideas. You could discuss ideas that you didn't particularly believe in. You could discuss ideas that maybe you didn't want to believe in. and you could weigh evidence. It's interesting to me. It's not going to be much consolation to anybody else, but I find it very interesting that just a couple of episodes of the Stratosphere Lounge ago, I said, I just read some evidence that was very compelling. I thought that Edward de Vere, 16th Earl of Oxford, was the person who actually wrote Shakespeare's plays. And then I read the other side of the argument and don't believe that anymore. So even that particular article, at least the interview I think we're talking about, we were specifically talking about the bell curve. Now, there's a lot of evidence in the bell curve. And here's my position on this. What I find is that from the beginning, throughout my entire career of doing this, and as recently as my last appearance, at least in Irvine, I'm pretty sure I said something even better in TPUSA down in Palm Beach, from the beginning, I must have said, I don't know, 20 times in public and on camera, that Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee Institute is evidence that this entire idea of racial inferiority is just not true, because he held his students to higher standards. I've said 20 times on camera that the Tuskegee students were not only had better grades than the white average, but they also had a higher legitimacy rate. I've said out loud several times that they not only were smarter, they were also better people. And finally, I forget which one it is. I've seen it, I've heard it, and I'm going to use it, needless to say, in my rebuttal, which is going to come when I get all this stuff collated. But one of these episodes or something I remember saying, and I've seen the transcript, I know it was there. I said, if we had listened to Booker T. Washington on this instead of W.E.B. Du Bois, then we would look at black people in America today like a priesthood. And people would go up to them on the street and say, can you translate this Latin phrase for me? Or can you give me some investment advice? Or my daughter is slipping into drug abuse. What do I do about that? So I think that if Media Matters has gone to the trouble to look at everything I've said, by the way, everything they talked about, everything that was in the memo, everything that the Ives campaign saw, all of it, was according to the memo that they saw. One interview that I did with Stefan Molyneux, and just that alone for a second, it's the kind of thing that nobody seems to think about. I probably have 5,000 hours of me speaking extemporaneously on camera. I certainly have 2,000 or 3,000 hours, no question about that. I find it interesting that at 5,000 hours of discussing things off script without a teleprompter, that all of this evidence comes from one interview. I find that actually quite interesting. And furthermore, what am I trying to say here? I spoke to somebody about this, somebody I admire very much, and basically what he said was, you're shocked by this and you're beat up by this because you could not imagine doing this to anybody. And I said, no, I couldn't. You don't understand that you're arguing with people, you're in a fight to death with people who have no sense of honor, no sense of integrity, no sense of fairness, nothing. If I'd written something about somebody, I thought I had really great evidence that somebody was a terribly cruel person, and somebody I hated, somebody like Michael Moore, and personal cruelty stories, and then I found out that Michael Moore worked in a women's shelter every night at the end of his shift and had done things for animal rescue and so on. There's no way I would have gone with that. If I'd seen any kind of exculpatory evidence or anything like that, then somebody with any character and integrity simply says, oh, okay, no. But there is so much stuff that they had to overlook, primarily again and 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 again. Tuskegee Institute. I remember. The way the memo was worded, and certainly the way that the Ives campaign issued their statement, it made it, they basically said that I said that blacks were lazy and unemployable. When what I said was, the culture of dependency has made them unemployable. And when I said dependency makes you lazy, the next thing I said was, and I ought to know, because when I was dependent on my friends for a year, I was lazy and angry, and when they decided to cut off this help, I was furious. It was the most embarrassing thing I've ever done, and I find it a little odd that someone who's trying to make me out to be a white supremacist and who says that black people are lazy follows that sentence immediately by saying, I ought to know about this dynamic because I was lazy too when I was dependent. So, and what it does is, this is the hard part, this is the part that's really, this is the part that is just so hard. Kirsten said, just shrug it off. I can't shrug it off. I'd love to tell you I could shrug it off. I suppose there are people that do shrug it off. I don't shrug it off. I'd like to. Natasha's helped me so much in these last couple days. I just think I would have gone barking mad without her, honestly. But the thing about it is, I guess maybe this is just a sign of, character or something. But when you read this kind of thing, I don't know if it's true for other people. I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking, well, it's going to sound strange to you, but this is exactly what goes through my mind. Was, well, is it true? Am I really a racist? Is this really what I said? Is this fair? Is this what I've become? And I was telling Natasha for the first 24 hours after that, I was telling her that that I was so reassured by reading my own transcripts. I know that's a strange thing to say, but it's absolutely true. When I got a chance to read what I had said on this issue and see all the other times I'd said things about it and so on, when I got to read that line that I wrote about the looking at black Americans as a priesthood if they'd been held to the standard that Booker T. Washington held for them, it was a relief. It was a relief to me. Because, it's just such a horrible thing to go through. You really start to question your own sanity on this. And look, thank you for all the kind words in the comment section. Thank you for all the support. Needless to say, this whole time we're not going anywhere. But there is an element about this. I'm going to look into legal action. Needless to say, Eric, thank you to a few other people who are going to check into that. So I think I have a pretty decent case. But in any event, whether I do or not, I mean to make this a national story, and I'm going to get my armor on, and I'm going to get my weapons handy before I do that, which means that I am going to whether or not it's a legal issue or not, I am going to be so armed and so prepared for this that it's going to be something that I'm going to try and get on Hannity about and Tucker Carlson and all the rest, because this is how it works. And by the way, it is unbelievably effective. And as I've said before, the left is not destroying this country through guns. We're all ammoed up, and we always believed that tyranny was, going to come with government tanks and guns and bullets and, just like in Nazi Germany. But it's not. It's coming through this. So for people of conscience, it's hard. And I think this may be one of the points I've been making since I started doing this. This charge of racism only works against people who aren't racist. And I've said it here 100 times. I've said it on the road 100 times. It doesn't matter how many times I've said it. When you wake up and see that, you see your name in your home city's newspaper, it's brutal. There's a lot of things about this. One of the people I have such admiration for, one of many people I have admiration for, is Antonia Okafor. On some level, I think black conservatives or gay conservatives or women conservatives have it harder even. than this, because it's terrible to be accused of something unjustly. It's just terrible. But worse than that, I think, is for people like Antonia and Alfonso Rach and all the rest, they not only get all this, but they also get the whole Uncle Tom race traitor kind of, you're not a real black person either. They've got to feel so left out and alone up there. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to basically, I could do hours and hours and hours of just me saying the exact opposite. I'll put a couple of quick little bites together. Just, I'm just going to say higher test scores, higher test scores, higher test scores, higher test scores, cut, 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 cut. I'm going to point out that in order to make this document that got emailed, you have to wade through an awful lot of higher test scores. And thank you again for all the kind comments, Troy and everybody else. And then I'm going to say, basically, so why would you wade past all these comments and things? And the answer is, because it works. And then I would like to, I haven't asked them yet, but what I think I would like to do, your first instinct is to get like, what's the word I'm looking for? Testimonials, and that's exactly the weakest thing to do. It's like, I can't be racist. I have a lot of black friends. Well, I'm not talking about black friends. I'm talking about black conservatives that I admire, who we've talked about this particular specific issue with before. But then I realized actually the better approach is to make sure that it doesn't look too defensive and personalized. And basically what I'd like to do, if I can, if they'll do it for me, is get in touch with Antonia and Zoe and Candace Owens, and also my memory's just a little left. What's his name? Chadwick, the gay conservative, and a couple of outspoken women, chicks on the right, that kind of thing, Diamond and Silk. And I want to just ask them 2 questions on camera. I want to say, what's the worst thing they've ever said about you? And then the second thing I'll say is, why do you think they said it? And I really think that's the core of it. But what I was going to say earlier, and look, it's just quite psychologically shocking, and I have to fight back on this very hard, because whether I like it or not, whether you like it or not, this is never going away. It's never going to go away. There will always be people that will be holding this up wherever I go. And I'm going to have to just constantly deal with it. By the way, Troy points out that pointing out the black grains of sand, and that's exactly the argument I'm going to use. I'll get to that in 1 second. Thank you. But it would be nice to have a document saying, well, the next time somebody calls me this, I can say, here's a retraction. And I got to tell you, I don't care if it's on the 14th page. A retraction is a retraction. In any event, I don't know the details of all that. I'm looking into it. I'm going to have a meeting right after Stratosphere Lounge tonight about this. But I think it would help hearing from a bunch of other people some of the slander, I think it would make, especially if it becomes clear that, this lands. And here's the final thing that I just don't know really exactly what to deal with. I could go and stand up in a room full of social justice warriors and basically say, listen, it's not a question of being quoted out of context in the interview. The entire interview is out of context for my entire career before and after the interview. So I can stand there and make this case and tell them, look, you don't get to tell me how I feel. But what the response, I can tell what the response will be is, oh, you're caught. See, now you're caught and you're just trying to backpedal. And this is the thing I don't understand. With somebody like Harvey Weinstein, for example, this was a secret. I mean, he was he and a bunch, and all the rest of these progressive moral standards, he was intimidating people into silence about something he knew was completely wrong. And I am not being quiet about any of this. So the argument is, well, now you've been caught, and so you're backpedaling, and you're just trying to prove something that you're not in order to get away with it. And this is where I kind of just don't know what to say, because I don't understand their argument. Doesn't mean, well, what else isn't it, right? But basically, what are you saying? Are you saying that the best way for me to get my racist message out is for me to constantly insist that I'm not a racist? Is that essentially what you're saying? Because it sounds like what you're saying, and it is what they're saying. So basically, they're saying the fact that you're denying it means you are it. And you know, I don't know what you do with that. I generally don't know what to do with that just yet, other than to say, well then, it must be that all of this progressive social justice warrior work you're doing is because you want to become a top corporate executive at an oil company. And this is the way that you provide cover in order to achieve that. You know, if I'm out there influencing people, that's what I try to do. I do know I never made the statement that white people are superior to black people. I know I never made it because I never thought it. And if you're going to accuse the Democratic Party of being the largest slaveholders in the history of the world, my feeling about the bell curve and the discussion with Stefan Milneau, who believes in this stuff much more strongly than I do, my feeling was, you can make an accusation like that, which I did and have. You'd better be able to back it up and look at the other side. In other words, if you're going to accuse the Democrats of causing this catastrophe and progressive policies, which I've done and continue to do, then you have to, at least I think, in fairness, myself, just for my own internal fairness, I feel like I have to examine everything about it. Is that in fact it? Is that it? Is it something else? And like I said, I saw a lot of stuff in the bell curve, and a lot of the stuff in the bell curve is well-sourced. I've seen a lot of other things that are well-sourced. And the first thing I learned in debate in 11th grade was that I could be, when I was in debate, I found out that you could get endless supplies of experts saying factual data that this was true. And then 10 minutes later in the next classroom, I could pull out another 20 or 30 experts saying the exact same fact was false. It was a real wake-up call for me. You're sitting there in the if you're doing the affirmative case, you're saying that that capital punishment deters crime, and then the next room you're negative, and you have to say that capital punishment doesn't deter crime, and that was so amazing to me to be able to find just ranks and ranks and ranks of people making, experts, by the way, in the field, making these declarative statements. This is true, 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 true. And here's a bunch of people saying false, 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 false. And as we've discussed many times on this show, it leaves you in a place where you have to weigh evidence. You have to weigh evidence. I thought the whole thing with Edward de Vere was a really great example of that. It was a fun example for me, because the initial case for the evidence on the Earl of Oxford was strong. It looked strong anyway. You put it together in such a way it looks strong. And then next thing you know, you read the other side of the case and realize, well, that's probably stronger. But I think the thing that is most striking to me is, no matter where I was going with this and no matter what I was doing or thinking about or trying to come to a decision about, the one thing that I never ever changed, because this is what I believe as opposed to what I read, I never ever stopped talking about the Tuskegee Institute and the pride that I felt as an American in the evidence that this racial superiority thing's just a bunch of, it's just bullshit. I don't know what to say other than that, but we'll see. But I do need to, I need to go as far with this as I can. I've heard a couple people have actually proposed this or tried to do it, but I think it would be great and important for there to be a legal defense fund of real money. And and just go after these people and just sue them for huge sums of money. Even sue them for the retraction. It's just so low, it's so underhanded, and it works, It works. Yeah. Anyway, as I said, I think one of the things that's most strongly, one of the things that I just kind of hang on to the most, because it's a hard thing, is, and by the way, shouldn't I be excited and happy about this? I mean, if I'm a white supremacist, shouldn't this be something I'm celebrating now that everybody's finally heard my opinions about this? Why would I be so upset about this if it were true? I forgot what I was going to say. Oh well, I forgot. In any event, it'll come back to me. But yeah, anyway, it's been a rough weekend, and thank God for my wife, and also thank God for some of the super incredible, extraordinary people who stood with me through this whole thing, and they will get their name credit when the time comes. But I mean, people who were involved with this on the ground level as it was happening were just super. I mean, they just never, ever wavered for a second, despite the fact they were hearing things like, what kind of people do you associate with, So, anyway, let's have a look at the questions. Okay. By the way, I guess you saw the Facebook post. I tried to post the same thing I've posted every single time for the last 6 years, 7 years, whatever it's been. The Stratosphere Lounge banner, and see it tonight at 9 and 6, and Facebook wouldn't let me post it. I got that warning that I posted in the comments section. We figured a workaround, but I posted. Well, here's what I wrote. Thanks to so many of you for the kind support over the last several days. Needless to say, we'll respond when we are fully prepared to respond. Meanwhile, I'm happy to talk about recent events or anything else for that matter tonight at 9 ET 6 PT, Stratosphere Lounge logo publish. And up comes a box from Facebook saying, your post isn't published yet. Before your post is published, Undefined must confirm that they have branded content partnership with you. They'll be able to see this post before deciding whether to approve your page. Never seen that before. These guys are all in now, folks. And yeah, we have this window with Donald Trump, and I just never thought, I just never, ever imagined I would see this in this country. I just never did. And that's one of the reasons why the whole Falcon Heavy launch made me so happy. It was nice to be proud of my country the way I was my entire life until you start seeing this happening. And at the highest levels. I mean, the FBI, the Treasury Department, Office of the President, Secretary of State, this giant conspiracy of destruction in this news media, just if for no other reason, just as one specific. I know you guys don't need any evidence, but I mean, you would think that even if you accepted Comey's, the FBI Director Comey's recommendation to not press charges against Hillary Clinton, even if you were a leftist and you bought that, what? Would you not be at all interested in the fact that the FBI director has basically said that at the very least, the statement she made, I did not post any classified information, I didn't know any of it was classified. You would not, as a newspaper person, you would not want to follow up on those questions? They are very, 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 very evil people. They're not just people we disagree with. They're people without any sense of forget honor or integrity or anything like that. These are people that must have, and I'll just close with this. I've said it before. I'll say it again. These are people who must have waded through scores, if not hundreds, of statements that I made in in direct contravention of what they accused me of, and nevertheless had the nerve to go in there and do that. And if we don't have the means to brush these people back off of this, then I don't know what to say, because it really is then just a matter of time. And I mean that in a way that everybody watching this should personalize. I don't mean it in a philosophical way anymore. I don't mean like in this kind of vague sense of the future of the country and this sort of, kind of low-level dread that things are just turning off. This is a dark, terrible, terrible catastrophe. I would just advise you, for the sake of your own motivation, to personalize this and to understand that if somebody had access to everything that you'd said over the last 5 or 6 years, because I do this on camera, and I'll get to that in a second, and understand that anybody can put together any story they want to with that many data points. It's the example, I used it before and somebody mentioned it earlier about the sand. I used this first with Michael Moore back in the eject days, talking about how you can make a point out of anything. And it's a superb argument, if I do say so myself, and it basically works like this. When I was confronted about this, they said, "Did you say this?" I said, "Well, I said this, yes, but I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Did you say that inner city blacks were unemployed and unemployable?" I said, "I did say that because it's true. They are unemployed and unemployable. And the reason they're unemployed and unemployable is because of this. This is the intention. This is the policy that's intended to. This is what you want. You want these people who are dependent on you, and you have to convince them that the Republicans are even worse." And they basically wanted me to either retract it, or do you want to? They said, "Do you want to say that maybe this wasn't artfully worded?" And I was ready to go with that for a second. That artfully worded, I was never going to apologize. I had nothing to apologize for, but I was almost ready to say, "Okay, well, inartfully worded, okay." And then I realized, you know what? Honestly, you cannot think and have a discussion. You cannot be a free person and use your mind and weigh alternatives if you are constantly measuring every single syllable you say to see if the most easily offended person in the country at some point in the future might decide to make a crusade out of this. So, I don't know how many of these things were direct quotes. I'm beginning to suspect that look, if I find any cases where that memo that was sent out by a blogger, by the way, not Huffington Post or anything, a blogger, when that memo was sent out, if I find anything in that memo that has me in quotation marks and I didn't say that, I think we got a pretty strong case there in any event. The argument, the sand argument, which is the whole argument, as I said about Michael Moore back in, I want to say 2005 or something, Bowling for Columbine, somewhere around there. If you stand on the cliffs of Malibu and look down at the beach, you see the white beaches of Malibu. It's a kind of a very pale yellow. It's a light tan, but the beach, it's a white beach. And the sand is white. And if you go down into the sand and just sit there, and you hold a handful of sand right up in front of your face, you'll notice that the sand is white and somewhat clear, but mostly white. But interspersed with all of these white grains, there is an odd grain of very dark material, which was one of the rocks that was crushed or whatever the case may be. But you hold up a handful of sand, and you'll see that virtually all of it's this kind of light tan, but there are little dark specks in there, pieces of sand from the beach. And so if I were to sit there with a pair of tweezers and a magnifying glass, and I was to pull out all of the dark particles only and put them in a bucket, and if I were to do this for a while, I would be able to say in front of groups of people, look at the sand from the black beaches of Malibu. Look at the sand from Malibu. And people would say, and you would say to this guy, and he could say with truth, with factual accuracy, yes, these are, in fact, from the beaches of Malibu. You can see how this is the sand that I got off of the beach at Malibu. And you'd be telling the truth. But you'd be lying through your teeth. And so, yeah. Kirsten again says, now I experience how living under the commies in East Germany and Russia was. Yes, Kirsten, I do. And if we don't do something about this, then you will too. And we all will. because then it's just, as I say, it's a matter of time. They accuse you of something. They have no evidence for it. They make you defend yourself. I've got a situation that's currently brewing, and I haven't made a decision yet. I'm going to talk with Natasha, sleep on it a little bit. But basically, I'm going to defend myself in the way that I am best at defending myself. I'm going to do it with words, and especially I'm going to do it with my own words spoken both before and after these accusations are made. But as far as going to college campuses and stuff and facing these vicious, small-minded, smug, stupid people, I don't feel any obligation whatsoever to go out there and to defend myself against this from those people. I need to do it, and I need to do it as loudly as possible. But to go and stand there and argue with these people about this, I should have just called one of these college students a pedophile and said, I'm not going to be seen on the same stage as you. And then prove to me you're not. So, anyway. Some people have tried to start a legal defense fund. I don't know if it's been funded or not, but I think that whatever money is out there on the part of freedom-loving Americans, it had better get deployed quickly, because the big lie is continued to be told, and the more they lie, the more the more they do it. The final thing there it is. There's the 8th time I said the final thing, so it must mean I'm pretty close to being done. I asked these people from the campaign, I said, do you think President Trump is a racist? And I said, no. Well, he's accused of it every day. And they said they didn't think I was either, but that's what happened. So that's what happened. Anyway, yeah, I know Ben and Milo love this kind of thing, and I don't. All right, let's look at some questions here. Jim Samples, God bless him, has been such a help for me over the years, and especially in the last several days. Went to all the trouble to keep all this stuff organized and classified and stuff, and made it easy for me to find. But anyway, yeah, guys, this country's in real trouble here. Here's Jim's questions. Back to the movies. Why not? A movie paradigm shift, and don't beat me up for it. Like you, I love the movie It's a Wonderful Life. However, I heard many years ago that Frank Capra described the movie as more of a reflection of socialism. At least that was the intent, i.e. Bedford Falls being nearly overrun by big, fat, uncaring capitalist banker who cared nothing for the individual or the small business, eventually turning Bedford into capitalist Potterville, where everyone fends for themselves, and in the end, the community rises arm in arm, coming together, socialism to beat capitalism and big bankers back. That was supposedly Capra's intent, but it didn't quite work out that way. I like our version better, but I fear it can be seen both ways. I would like to see evidence that that was Capra's intent. Frank Capra made a bunch of really pro-American movies. And by the way, It's a Wonderful Life is not my favorite, and neither is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. My favorite Capra movie is Meet John Doe. And by the way, just this second, like a lightning bolt occurs to me, Meet John Doe is something that I should really see again pretty quickly. If you haven't seen it, it's about a guy who stumbles into the spotlight, and they start these John Doe clubs for, they're just highly noble and good clubs. And somebody sets him up in such a way that it makes him look like he's basically completely done the exact opposite of that. And the guy is completely, he's utterly abandoned, and he just falls into disgrace and so on. And it's a powerful movie. I need to see that again. Gary Cooper, and who doesn't like Gary Cooper? So here's the thing, Jim. First of all, whether or not it was Capra's intent, it does matter. I'd love to tell you it didn't matter, but it does matter. But that's not something that comes up as subtitles in the stories. Secondly, somebody told me, and I think they made a pretty compelling case for it, although I don't remember all the evidence for it, but somebody said that when you get right down to it, Ronald Reagan didn't come here to protect us against left-wingers and socialists. He came to protect us against crony capitalists. And the argument was and is, and I think is actually quite a good argument, was that if you didn't have bad capitalism, there would be no need for socialism whatsoever. This is why the intersection of government and business, I cannot think of any example where it turns out well. I know a lot of people said, oh, you're giving too much credit to Elon Musk. He's taking government subsidies. I suppose that's true. Well, I don't suppose it's true. It is true. I don't know about the case with Tesla. I'm going to leave Tesla out because I just don't know. I just don't know the answer. But some subsidies for his SpaceX program. My feeling on this particular case is that the U.S. government has a national interest in being able to get to the space station that we put up there. And if the only way we can get Americans into the space station is to ride with the Russians, especially with how things have been going lately, I'm sorry to say, then this is an appropriate use of government money, getting a space transportation system in the national interest for not only for the use on an international space station, but I'm sure, I have no doubt whatsoever, and people out there must know details about it, I don't, that SpaceX is doing some defense work. So the way I look at it is they're paying for a service that needs to be provided. But in any event, put that aside. It seems to me that every time that that business really gets in the weeds in terms of morality is when it gets too big, and especially when it gets involved with the government. When the great book, and its name has slipped my mind, The Myth of the Robber Barons, by the professor whose name will appear in just a moment up here, who works at Hillhurst College? Hillcrest. Anyway, Havenhurst? It's just slipped my mind. Anyway, basically what he was saying is that there are two different kinds of capitalists. There are entrepreneurial capitalists, and there are, I don't know if he used the word political capitalists, but basically the argument is that there are companies that immediately, once they become successful, they petition the government for specific contracts. They petition the government to make sure that they're the only people that get the contracts. They try to lock out the competition, and these are the people that use. Is it Eric Blake? Oh, sorry, no. These are the people that use the government to protect them from other competitors. These are the political capitalists. And then the entrepreneurial capitalists are the ones who understand that the market is actually the strongest thing. And so these are the people that don't want government protecting them. And the book is filled with examples of one railroad versus another railroad, the steam line owned by Commodore Vanderbilt, I think it was, and all the rest of it. Burton Folsom, thank you very much. Stout Cat, that's the guy. He's a brilliant guy. And also David Wellman and whoever's coming next. His entire argument was that there is a species of crony capitalism, mercantilism is a better term for it, that basically says, I make this product, I'm going to sell it to the government, and the government's going to provide laws to make sure that only I sell it to the government or to my clients, and no one gets to compete. I don't call that capitalism, and if it is capitalism, it's certainly not free market capitalism, which is what I believe in 100%. So Capra can warn against the excesses of political mercantilism and this kind of rapaciousness that some corporations have shown without necessarily being a socialist. I mean, it seems to me that George Bailey runs a bank. I mean, he's not running a charity. He's not running a soup kitchen. He's running a bank, and it's a small bank, and it's a family business, and he's trying to do the right thing and so on. Potter's kind of a cartoon figure in a way, and you'd think, wow, it's just an exaggeration. And then you look at some of the things that Enron did. What do you say about that? People say, well, do you not see how evil this is? The corporations are evil. I see that this corporation is evil, and I don't think there's any other word for it, when you have these executives giving themselves millions and millions of dollars that are coming from their employees' 401k funds that have just evaporated because the company's gone out of business. There's no other word for that. That's just plain evil. But that's certainly not the standard of how businesses are run. And I think you probably would find, if you were able to look at it, I bet you'd find that the percentage of honest corporations is much higher than the percentage of honest people relative to their the population of number of corporations versus the number of people and so on. So as far as It's a Wonderful Life goes, I would be sad to hear that he was actually saying, hey, socialism is great, but you can say that Potter's kind of capitalism is bad and evil and not be pulling for socialism, and that's certainly the intention, or the intent rather, I got off of It's a Wonderful Life. There is a great deal of disgust about Potter's form of capitalism and cutthroat business practices, and I share that disgust. So, I don't really know. But it seems to me that might be a reach, unless he came out and said so. If he came out and said so, I'll be disappointed. But I will say this: it's one thing to be a socialist in the 30s and 40s, especially even earlier. But even in the 30s and 40s, you could believe in this illusion and be guilty of nothing more than wishful thinking, or maybe even higher than that. But certainly by the time you're into the 70s and 80s, and there's no question about the damage that it's done. That's why they kept so much of the news from the Soviet Union secret. That's why Walter Duranty was such an effective leftist. He basically put the entire prestige of the New York Times behind the fact that everything in Russia was just swell. And he knew it wasn't. It didn't stop him because it agreed with his philosophy. And in Duranty's case, people were dying. They weren't just being slandered. They were being starved to death. And he enabled that starvation to continue because he not only didn't cover those atrocities, he also covered them up. So, yeah. Okay, Jake Sorticus. Sorry, Jake, looks like a new name. Good to see you. Regarding the controversy of statements about statistical distributions, i.e. Dr. Peterson, Newman, and the wage gap, Ewan Molyneux on race and IQ, do you believe the controversy is generally due to a critic's ignorance, stupidity regarding statistical models, or is their outrage manufactured by cynically and knowingly distorting the meaning of a statistic? Having thought about this a great deal lately, one thing that has come out of this for me in a positive way in terms of going forward is a realization of just how complex things really are and how difficult it is to isolate this. When I was talking about, I don't usually use the wrong word, and I try to be very careful about the wrong word. But when I said in the Stefan interview that we don't necessarily have a money problem with poverty, we may have a cognition problem, I specifically didn't say we have an intellect problem. And I didn't say we have a black intellect problem. I said we have a cognition problem. By cognition, what I meant, I don't know. I would have said IQ, but I didn't. So maybe cognition wasn't the word I was looking for. A much better word, I wish I'd used it before, but I just didn't know the term before. What I was trying to say, and what I think all the rest of the work that I've done has been trying to say, is that what I was basically saying was these communities are lacking what Thomas Sowell called human capital. That's what I meant to say. That's certainly my intention, it's not a question of IQ so much as it's a question of human capital. And what that means is there are so many bad decisions that are made when you're surrounded by people who make bad decisions. You simply don't know any better. It's not a question of you're not smart enough to understand it. You have no way of knowing what the right thing to do is because nobody around you is doing the right thing. And as I said in that interview, I ought to know. I mean, I was stone cold broke for 25 years of my life, half my life, at least that long. I remember very well that I was probably 48, maybe something like that. before I consistently had four figures in a bank account. I mean, not hundreds of dollars, but, didn't dip below $1,000. I was probably 48 years old before that happened. Certainly I had the means to do better than that earlier. And the reason I didn't was because I just simply didn't really know how. It's not that I couldn't figure it out. I didn't really want to, and I was following this whole kind of, artist dream and all the rest of it and put up with all these hardships. But certainly if I had spent those 25 years surrounded by people who were tremendously successful, both financially and in business, I wouldn't have wasted that time. I wouldn't have spent 25 years just doing, this. It was just crazy. I just didn't know any better. So, what the best answer I can come up with to your question is this. And by the way, I think this also bears mentioning for somebody who's accused of white supremacism. If it turns out that all of that data is not only correct, but is in fact deterministic, it bears pointing out that according to this idea, Ashkenazi Jews have an IQ 15 points above white people. Asians have a significantly higher IQ than white people. So I guess I'm the kind of white supremacist who's really saying, well, we're smack dab in the middle. One of those guys. The reason I find this interesting is because if it's true that Asian IQ is 4 or 5 points higher than white IQ, then why are we kicking their ass so often? This is the first thought I had reading the bell curve. Why are we kicking their ass? Why was China in such a state of poverty China crawled out of the Stone Age in the year 2000. Hong Kong in 1999, China thinks that they absorbed Hong Kong, but Hong Kong absorbed China. And this is another point. That's why I thought that, this doesn't explain everything. It may not explain anything. What you're measuring may not explain anything, because if that IQ thing were determinate, then China and Japan and Vietnam and all the rest of these countries would be where the West is, because they have, according to this data, statistically higher IQs. But that's not the case at all. In fact, it's pretty much the reverse of the case. The West was the West was going to the moon when the Chinese were, still living in stone huts. I remember this to be true because I was editing video on it. Year 2001, I was during the 9/11 attacks. That period of time, I was editing videos, a series of documentaries about China. I had 2 episodes. One of them was about the moon cake custom, I think, and the other one was something else. I don't remember which, but they had footage from 2000 and they had footage from 1992, and you couldn't cut them together. In 1992, people were wearing blue Mao jackets, and they were pushing ancient bicycles into housing that had stone floors. And 5 years later, you've got people in business suits with cell phones. You simply couldn't cut them together. It didn't look like it was the same century, let alone the same decade. So I remember reading this, and I don't know whether I said it on the show with Stefan or anywhere else, but I do remember clearly thinking, well, if they're so damn smart, how come we're kicking their ass? That's what I think is really going on here. And this is the problem. I guess this is my big lesson. I would say this is my big intellectual lesson from this, from all this blowback. I have come to an appreciation that maybe I didn't have quite before. I always understood that things were more complex than they seemed to be, and in many cases more complex than we could understand. But what I think had clarified for me is that by trying to isolate one variable in order to understand what's true, in the attempt to isolate that variable, you very often overemphasize that variable. Does that make sense? When we try to understand something and we try to get a handle on something and we say, this appears to be different here than it is there, is this the cause? Whether it is or isn't, we've already probably made it much more important than it actually is, because so much is connected to so much else. Everything is all interrelated. And again, just by isolating a variable, you tend to, I think, overemphasize it. Where was that line? Merlin says that Asians in Asia are stuck in backwards cultures that fetter the advanced IQ. The IQ test is the IQ test. This is the point of why I think this is probably not really very significant at all. You can have a cultural system that so stunts your horizons that there's no way to ever tell what your potential might be, despite, no matter what it is. This is Sol's argument, certainly my argument. The whole reason I was talking about race in the first place. By the way, I suspect I will start my defense video, and I don't want to be too defensive about it, but I mean, I'm pretty upset about this. I think I will start this by saying, look, if I was really a white supremacist and I really hated black Americans, then I would do what every other Republican politician in the country is doing, and I'd do what every Democratic politician in the country is doing. If I really hated black people and thought that I was superior to them because of my skin color, then I'd be doing exactly what the Hollywood movie stars are doing and exactly what the news media swells in the skyscrapers in New York are doing, and that is I would keep my mouth shut. I wouldn't talk about it at all. Because 8,000 Americans are killed every year in these inner cities of ours, and if it was 8,000 celebrities or 8,000 TV anchors, we'd all be talking about this problem, which makes me actually realize that I genuinely, just based on the evidence, I must care more about inner city America, black America, than the Black Lives Matter movement or any of these progressives. Because whether I'm going down the right road or not, I'm trying to understand what's happening so that we can get a handle on why in every one of our major cities, 600-700 people are murdered every year. If anybody can remember this, I talked with Aesop about this. If anybody remembers me talking about a book called The Corner, I want to say I got it in, middle of the year 2015, somewhere around February, March, maybe a little earlier. Of all the books I've read on race and all the books I've read on crime and all of this, all of it together, the book that by far has had the biggest influence on me is not The Bell Curve or Coming Apart or any of this other stuff. It's The Corner, which is written by a big old liberal named David Simon. And it's the story of a family it's a true story. He lived with them for a year, of a family in Baltimore and their associates. And DeAndre is a 16, 17-year-old drug dealer. And his grandfather, who moved there from the South, was part of the Baltimore in the 50s and early 60s that had all of these houses with perfectly manicured yards, and everybody worked in the same factory. Black people and white people together went to the same churches, had backyard barbecues and picnics and all the rest of it. Now those houses look like they've been bombed, and people are ripping the electrical wires out of the walls so that they can get $5 for a speedball for the next boost. And the grandfather, who had worked so hard, has watched his son and grandson just fall into this life of misery and crime and death and desperation. Basically says in front of the presence of David Simon that looking down the street he sees some drug dealers, and the black grandfather says, I think they should just kill all of them. I certainly never said that, and I don't believe that. But what he is saying is he can see the damage and the destruction that it's caused. But it's the middle character, it's DeAndre's father, that just I can't really let go of. He was, the pictures of him are so kind, and the stories about him are so kind. But this middle generation, not the generation that built Baltimore and all the rest of the country, for that matter, and not the generation that's ripping electrical wires out of the walls and peeling off aluminum to sell for scrap metal. The middle character wanted to be an engineer, was studying to be an engineer, was doing well, fell in with the wrong person, kind of fell in love with the wrong person, and he simply just blew up on his way into orbit. He fell into addiction, tried to get out, got a job for a while, worked the job, looked like he was maybe going to turn things around, then ended up taking longer and longer breaks. A bunch of white kids came in, and he became kind of like their guide to the underworld, and he started buying them drugs, and he started doing some more drugs, and in the end he dies of exposure or something in some crack house, pretty much by himself. And to see his face, I'll never forget it. I never will. He just seems he seems so kind, and he was kind, and he was just talked about constantly about his Troy, can you cut that for me and send me that whole quote, please? It's a quote from one of my essays in Silent America. I don't believe for an instant in any genetic nonsense about slave races or nations of purebred heroes. That word sounds, thank you, freedom. Yeah, if you could cut the paragraph, I'd really appreciate it. And just, that'd be great. Anyway, I think about him a lot, and I think about that face, and I think about that trap that he fell into. And I also think about the fact that I've met so many people on the road doing what I do. So many people from all different backgrounds, and all of them just tremendous people. And I've even had a chance to meet with people who were, especially in Austin, Texas. Sorry, not in Austin, at the Austin University in Natchitoches. Even then, which was by far the most unpleasant experience I've had on the road, I started conversations with people who I am diametrically opposed to, and I just simply started breaking it down, just started breaking it down. Can we agree that having control over your own life is better than being dependent on somebody else? Yes. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, the problem is there used to be jobs there, and now there isn't. Now there aren't any jobs there, rather. Well, what do we do about that? Well, that's a tough nut to crack, But that's basically it. And so when you get down to that, you realize that, as I said during the Molyneux interview, if I had been born, if somehow my personality could have emerged in an inner city American neighborhood, I have no question I'd be a drug dealer now. What else would you be? When you read The Corner, you realize that this young son, DeAndre, who also falls and who died a couple years ago, after having been a bit of a celebrity for a while. This is what The Wire was based loosely on, but they did an actual miniseries called The Corner. I think it was a 6-part episode. I cannot recommend it highly enough, because the great thing about The Corner is how it humanizes this issue, how it's all you can say. It's how it humanizes it. You see the actual cost on real people. And where I was going with all the people that I've had arguments with before, I actually remember being quite surprised at how much I liked people even once I started talking to them, and how that sense of, this person's not as evil as I thought they were, is just an enormous relief. You feel it all the time in this country. There are moments when, somebody will hold a door for you at an elevator. Somebody, from another race will hold your door at the elevator, and you look at them and they smile at you, and you realize that all of this stuff is just invented. It's invented. People are not naturally like that, and it wasn't that way before. And people, it's a data point that back in the 50s and 60s, without question, the level of racism and discrimination was far, far, far higher than it was today. Far higher. And yet, Black America was doing so much better. Their families were so much more intact. The neighborhoods that they lived in and shared with other white workers were just, this little street was a nice little tidy row of streets. Something happened. This is the whole essence of why I talk about this. Something happened. Something bad happened. And I don't know what else to say other than the dependency trap, which I suspect, I believe, by and large, was implemented with the best of intentions. But certainly, the destruction of the people who are pointing out that this big experiment of ours not only didn't work, it's been a catastrophe. That is not the best of intentions going on there with the people trying to stifle that argument. This invention is the problem. And when you look at the corner and you see what Baltimore has become in these neighborhoods, combat zones is not really the word. I mean, there's a lot of violence and a lot of murder, but that's not really the issue. It's the hopelessness of it, the absolute utter hopelessness. And what else would you feel there? And by the way, if you were there and you had a shred of initiative or any kind of sense of running your own destiny, you have no choice. You're a drug dealer, or that's it. Those are your choices, basically. And if you weren't one of those, and this is what you had to face every day, and there was an escape for 4 hours that cost you $5, I don't know who'd be able to resist it. I quite certainly don't think I would have been able to resist it. Something happened, and I am trying to get to the heart of what it was. And again and again and again and again and again, I come back to not just Tuskegee, not just to the Tuskegee Airmen as well as the Tuskegee Institute, not just to the 54th Massachusetts. I come back to the whole thing and realize that this, of all the evidence back and forth about the cause, the fact of the matter is, the only evidence we have about actual outcome on actual human beings in the real world, we're not talking about test scores or anything like that. The only evidence that we have that stands is evidence like the Tuskegee Institute and like Ben Carson and like any one of these people who came from abject poverty. And yes, you can say that Carson's very bright. He's obviously extremely liberal. He's a brilliant man. But it's when you ask people about how they came out of this situation, they came out of the poverty and the hopelessness because of almost exclusively because of the sheer iron willpower of one of their parents, if not both of them. And when you point out that Baltimore used to look good and Detroit used to look good and St. Louis used to look good and Newark used to look good, and all of these places used to look good, and the last time it looked good was the last time that there was a Republican governor or mayor or city council. That's not to say necessarily that it certainly wasn't the intent of the Democrats to do this, but this is what happened. And when you have America's inner cities, Chicago, 80 years, was it? 84 years, 64 years, something like that. I should need to get these numbers memorized. But 80 years without a change in party? Put aside the outcome. If you had 80 years of the same philosophy of any kind in this country, what do you think would happen? If it was 80 years of conservatism, let's say, purebred Ronald Reagan, laissez-faire conservatism, if you had 80 years of it without challenge, I can absolutely assure you that this philosophy would have become as corrupt as any other human philosophy that doesn't get tested when this sin of pride just rises up and convinces you that you can't possibly be wrong. And this is what these colleges have become and news media have become. They become these smug, arrogant pits of certainty. And I'm convinced that the certainty of your own nobility is there specifically because of you understand on some level that there is a big gaping hole in the middle of you where your conscience should be, and and all the rest of it. Okay, let's see. I might just go to 7:30 tonight. I do have to make a trip downtown and get home. I'm out of town tomorrow. I'll do 2 more, I guess. Looks like Alice Idavai. What a cool name. Hope I pronounced it correctly. Sorry if not. I've been going back through your old TSL episodes. Can't get enough, apparently. And I ran into something that I felt like an anvil falling on my head. You mentioned back when you were writing Eject, Eject, Eject that someone wrote that your spiritual journey wasn't over yet. If you could give a message to the person who made that comment, what would you like to say? Please answer before reading the rest of this. This is great. This is like one of those advent calendars where you get to open a new window every day. So I will not read the rest of the question. What I would say to the person who gave me that message, I would say thank you for understanding my psychology as well as you did and do, or certainly the psychology of the person where I was, because, as I've said before, it initially really outraged me. It was like, who do you think you are? You don't know anything about me. Turns out they knew everything about me. I was wrong about that. I suspect that they knew, and it doesn't matter whether they knew or not. On some level, the fact that they said what they said meant somebody, something, somewhere knew that this was exactly the kind of worm that would burrow into my head and that I wouldn't be able to let go. If somebody had just said, Bill, you need to come to Jesus, or Bill, you need to get to religion, or any of this stuff, I would have just would have bounced off me. But that there was something about the way that statement was worded that I never, ever let go of. Couldn't forget it. And it kept working on me. And it was one of the many things, probably one of the major, if not the major thing, that that just kept gnawing away at this certainty about things that I knew nothing about, and that the certainty about things that actually kind of defy certainty in a way. So that's what I would say to them. First of all, I'd say thank you, and secondly, I would say I don't know whether you knew at the time that you understood my psychology as well as you did, but if you did, congratulations, and if you did not, it doesn't matter because it had the same effect, so thank you. So let's see what the rest of the question is. My dad used to read your blog, and several years ago he told me that he'd written a comment that probably meant he'd be your most hated fan. You'd written an article about atheism and the proof that there was no God. I don't remember writing that. I'm sure I did. His comment was something to the effect of, while he agreed with you on many subjects, he felt your spiritual journey wasn't over yet. It must have been your dad. I can't begin to describe how much you've influenced my life with your insights and perspectives, and when I heard you talking about how much that statement affected you, it felt utterly surreal. I don't know if it means much or even if it anything to you, but I wanted to mention this as a fun little diversion. Thanks for everything you do and keep doing it, American flag. Alice, I have no question that it must have been your father, and I don't know if he is still alive. It was a while ago. It was 10 years ago. More. Much more. Probably 2004. So 14 years ago. If he is, I have no question this was him. If he is, you pass on my answer prior to me finding out who it was. And if he is, could you have him write me at info@billwhittle.com, point out that I asked you to write during the Stratosphere Lounge show because I'd like to send your dad a personal email, and if he's not still with us, send it with your address, and I'll make a personal message to you too. Thank you. That's a lovely and quite deeply appreciated sentiment. All right, here we go. Last one. Dave Olson rears his handsome head again. Let's see what we have to say from Dave. Hi, Bill. Not too long ago, I watched The Men Who Built America, a docudrama on the History Channel about men like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, and Ford, whose grit and vision turned bucolic America into the superpower we are today. It seems to me that Elon Musk is exactly like those great men of yesteryear, reaching forward into the future and pulling it into today through sheer force of will. With all that said, what is the status of the Free Frontier Foundation? The Free Frontier Foundation, I'm sorry to say, is not dead, but it is certainly, it's not even on inactive reserve, Dave. you know how if you take a balloon and you put a bunch of dots on the balloon, this is one way to explain how the universe can be expanding and everything moving away from everything else at the same time. But if you put a bunch of ink dots on a balloon and you inflate the balloon, you see that they actually spread apart from each other and they're all moving. That's actually kind of what seems to be happening. It's being Alice, hooray. Anyway, so it's something I would still like to pursue, but there's much to pursue before then, and I don't know what else to say about it other than that. Needless to say, one of the reasons I was so interested in starting this idea of raising money for just for a space program was because I would like to have seen some of it, but I saw some of it yesterday with the Falcon Heavy launch. And as I said on either today's Right Angle or on the one we did yesterday, because they're both pretty much the same thing, I suspect that I'm going to live to see it now. You know, I suspect that I'm going to live to see a Mars landing because of Elon Musk, and people have, as I said, complained about him taking government subsidies. And look, I don't want to be two-faced about this. I agree. It would have been much nicer to do it without it. And it doesn't make it right just because he succeeded and cool about it. But the thing I think the thing that needs to be said about Elon Musk in defense of this is simply this. Elon Musk started out with, I don't know what he came out of PayPal with, 900 million, something like that. And Elon didn't say, hey, I'll put in 10 million if the government puts in, 200 million. For years and years, it was all his money. And I remember the first time the Falcon tried to launch and it just blew up, and I just thought, a lot of work ahead of you. And there was a lot of work ahead of him. At the moment that counted, he staked a significant portion of his personal fortune on this without any guarantees whatsoever that it was going to succeed. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep that up with A-List and so on. Basically what I said, if it just says you lost the Ustream, I said, if your father's still with us, please email me at info@billwhittle.com. And if not, do it anyway and just point out to Erica that I mentioned you on the show. I wanted to talk to you because I have no doubt it was your father at all, none. And I'd like to send him a message. Anyway, back to Elon. Those rockets were blowing up, and SpaceX wasn't cool, and there was no Tesla, and there was just a guy who was a visionary. And I've seen a couple of progressives saying, conservatives hate Elon Musk because he's an immigrant. He's a legal immigrant. And, because he took government subsidies. It's like, so what are you saying? I think it was, what's her name? Alyssa Milano. So we agree, Alyssa, then that free enterprise is awesome, that corporations can do wondrous things if you just get out of the way. We're all in agreement on that, aren't we? That business is the best way to do things. Private business is the best way to accomplish these kind of miracles. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what I'm saying. It's a toxic world out there sometimes. But yes, Elon Musk succeeded, and I suspect that Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars. When I say us, I mean America and secondarily the human species, because he's an individual. I don't think it's been released yet. You guys haven't seen it, but coming up, you'll probably see it tomorrow. In addition to the live SpaceX right angle that we did that went up today, mine was also about Elon Musk, and it's called Fun, 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 because I've said before that I think Fun, Fun, Fun by the Beach Boys would be a pretty good national anthem for this country. And to see a picture of Starman there in a red convertible, cherry red metallic convertible out there in space with the Earth in the background, this guy not only sitting in the chair, but kind of chilling in the chair, I think somebody said. That was because that he did that he chose the car for the payload. You needed to have some kind of weight in there to make sure that it was doing what it was saying it was going to do, and for engineers to get an idea on the actual performance of this thing. But the idea that he picked a roadster, and the idea that he would be playing David Bowie, and the idea that they would put a mannequin in the roadster, and the idea that on the information panel on the Tesla it would say "Don't Panic" from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and on the recovery boats, there are two slogans painted on the outside ring. I don't remember what they are. Somebody will tell me in a second. They're the titles of two books written by somebody who I'm unfamiliar with, but he just put them there. It's right there for everybody to see. It's not very big, but you can definitely tell it's there. And folks, what we saw yesterday is a result of one simple thing. And I mean this, and it's crystal clear to me because I've met people like this my whole life, my second half of my life anyway. Falcon Heavy lifted off yesterday, and humans might get to Mars, and Americans might get there first because one individual person named Elon Musk said he thought it would be fun to do it. Thought it would be fun. There's no other explanation for it. I know he talks about being a multi-planetary species and all the rest of it, but he did it because it's fun. It's the old saw, but it's absolutely true. How to make a small fortune in aerospace? Well, you start with a large fortune, and that's exactly what he did. I don't know this yet, but I would be astonished if he was already in the black on this. He's seen a lot of explosions. He does it because he's fun. I know Burt Rutan. There's a signal honor of my life that I'm friends with this man who's a genius and a historic figure. And that same exact kind of person as Elon Musk, a breakaway, brilliant person who's filled with a kind of confidence that usually only comes from really stupid people. That's how smart Bert and Elon and other people are, is that you can be very confident about things if you're very stupid. This is the story of most of my life. And then reaches a point when you begin to realize you don't have all the answers. And then for most of the rest of the time, you're like, well, I think this will work, might work. But when you get to a certain level, Bert's level and Elon's level, I think it gets replaced with a kind of a certainty that's the exact opposite of not knowing enough. I think comes a point when you realize, whether you admit it or not, you know so much about something that you know it's going to work. I remember hearing Bert talking about Spaceship One, and I remember him saying crystal clear, he said, yeah, space shuttle wasn't flying much, and in the 60s we had, I forget what it is, 10 different launch systems in the 1960s. He made me list them in order, and I did, except I missed one, which was the lunar module, by the way. A tricky one, but technically speaking, the lunar module was a launch system, got you off the surface of the moon. In any event, he said 10 different launch systems and so on. And he said, how many launches were there in 1961? And I listed them, I think it was 5, and he said 5, correct. How many were there in 2003 or 2004 or something like that, 2004? I said, I don't know. He said there were 5, and I was responsible for 3 of them, or 4 of them, something like that. So I remember when he was first telling me about how he got started with Spaceship One, he said, first words out of his mouth were, I just thought it'd be kind of fun to build a spaceship. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know. That's all of it right there. I've seen this from executives. They're not executives. They're visionaries. They're a long way past executives. And the one thing that I see consistently among people who have been breakout successful, not necessarily financially, but in a historic way, the one thing I've come to realize is that it's all about fun. It's just that simple. Elon Musk, so much of what Elon has done is post-PayPal. But everything that he's done post-PayPal is because of what he did pre-PayPal. PayPal is genius. It's just genius. And he took a lot of money out. So none of the guys that are big players in the space business now, these private individuals, none of them made any money in space, and I don't think any of them really expect to make any money in space. Certainly, Jeff Bezos, who's doing some, I don't want to say he's playing catch-up. Bezos is playing his hand much closer than Elon is, or Bigelow, with his inflatable space habs. These guys were guys. Elon Musk made his money in PayPal. Bezos made it with Amazon. Obviously, I think he's now the richest man in the world. Bezos can just write a check for 50 Mars missions and still have $50 billion when he gets done. But these are people who made their money in other areas, and they're not in it to make money. They're in it because it's fun. When you have that kind of money, it's beyond I don't need to work anymore, obviously. They don't stop working, though, because the reason they're so successful is because they love their work so much. But when you get to that level and you have the kind of resources that are available to them, it then becomes a question of what's fun. And I mean that in the very best term, the very best form of the word. My wife is so profoundly wise about things, and has said to me that, and it's a long story, I'm not going to get into details about this, but basically that my personality archetype is the Joker, which may not seem obvious to you guys. We're not talking about the Batman Joker. We're talking about kind of the classical image. Actually, the Joker, the jester, the actual term is the fool. It's the fool. And that's not self-deprecating, and it's not false humility. There is a quality about Elon Musk and Bert, and I suppose myself to some degree, because the fool is somebody who's depicted as walking along with their eyes up in the sky, carrying their stuff, everything they own on their back, about to walk off a cliff, and a little dog is nipping them on the butt and pulling them back so that they don't destroy themselves, because what they're basically doing is they're playing, and I'm certainly, this part of it I can certainly attest to, and that the only thing that really interests people like me is playing. This whole job is playing, really. I mean, look at the studio. I mean, really, just look at it. You got Star Trek everywhere. You got, it's just a giant toy box for a kid who hasn't grown up. I mean, it interests me, and because play interests me as much as it does, and because I have the support of the people out there who pay to keep these doors open, and also the support of a woman who's first person in my life, male or female, ever really understood me, certainly understands me better than myself, has taught me so much about myself, and made clear things for me that were just causing me so much anguish and distress my whole life. And she just simply came in and explained it to me. I said, "Oh, okay." But that playfulness is not just the essence of it. Is in fact, that is the creative force. That's the actual inventive force that powers innovation. It's certainly not the same kind of hard work that so many people do. It's certainly not engineering work, which requires real discipline and real brains and real stick-to-itiveness. It's not in any way any of those things. It's a sort of a freedom to not be serious. And this studio is all the example that you need. This is why I almost got through the whole show without mentioning it, but it looks like bad luck. No, this is the new drinking game because RK so played out. But this is what appeals to me so much about the Star Citizen thing, is that you can reach people while they're playing. That's a vulnerable time. And just go ahead and say this. What's the worst that could happen? Two members of the Stratosphere Lounge crew who I'll leave to identify themselves if they so desire, but we all know that they're known miscreants, and and unpleasant fighter pilots, those kind of people. I don't know how long ago it was. I want to say maybe the weekend or something like that. We basically, three of us met online, and we drove these two rovers over the surface of a planet that looks an awful lot like Mars. And for all intents and purposes, your consciousness is there. I understand that it's not a real world, and I understand that that they're not real vehicles, but they are real people, and the interactions that we're having with each other are the interactions we would have if we were actually seeing these things. And it was really fun to poke around a planet. I just set up a mission. We were just going to drive 37 kilometers in two six-wheeled rovers from one point to another on this planet in Star Citizen. And I was in one, and Known Miscreant and Loudmouth Fighter Pilot were in the other one. And as we were going over this landscape, I'd take the lead, and they could see me. They'd take the lead, and I could see them. And we're dodging rocks, and we're trying to find a path up. And the whole time was, I think we should go left here. Yeah, I think so too. You see that incline up there, about I don't know, halfway up the canyon up there on the left. I think we could probably get up that. Yeah, I guess so. The whole conversation was between me and two friends of mine. That's how bad my life is. I have to associate with people of this level. But we were solving the kind of problems that we would have had to solve if we were actually out there. And on some level, that's actually good enough, It's it was fun. And it was what I'd always wanted to do. It was exploring things and going places that no one had ever seen before. So, unfortunately, they're cyber places. I would have much preferred for them to be real places. I would have much preferred to have done it for real on Mars or someplace else. But that's beyond my control. But the cooperation and the brain work involved and the just the sheer fun of it was great. And by the way, Known Miscreant drives like a lunatic. And one of the reasons I wanted to drive this 37-kilometer course was because it's so treacherous, the terrain's so treacherous, that if you do it full on, out, full throttle, you're going to lose the rover. You're going to either flip it over or you're going to get it jammed in between rocks. So imagine my pride when during the course of this 37-kilometer mission, he does just fine, but I flip the rover over and also get it stuck in what looked like a tank trap. And the reason we went in two rovers was, having done it several times, or attempted to do it, I got about 7-8 kilometers before I got trapped or overturned several times. I said, let's see what happens with two people and two rovers, two crews and two rovers. And the first time I got tipped over, we just kept ramming that thing with the other rover until finally we just knocked it on its wheels. And the second time I got trapped in the like a little rock, basically like you're a turtle, the bottom of the vehicle's on a rock and the wheels are spinning. They got nothing to grab. I'm with you, Dave Wellman, who tunes into live ATC to relax. I'm with you so much on that. This time I got stuck on a rock, and this time I had friends who just came up and knocked me off it. And it was great. And we actually took pictures. Do I have one of them? I might, because it's time to go. I bet I do. Where I know I've got those on my computer. Did I put them on those or on Discord? I can't get to those. I think I got one here. So after we did this, yeah. Hang on. This is one of those times when you're just going to have to wait. Here we go. So one of the things that Star Citizen does not have in place yet is the character design feature. So every character, real life person that appears in the game looks like every other person in the game, because they had a lot of tech they had to work out, among things like me and some other guys who are in different parts of the country experiencing the same rocks and the same terrain in real time, even though we're separated by thousands of miles. So they're trying to solve those kind of problems. And one of the things they haven't gotten online yet is the character creator thing, so that you can make a character look like anything you want to. But nevertheless, the great pictures are at home. I don't have them on me. But this is the final picture we took after this 38-kilometer epic trip. And yeah. And we went from this base to this emergency shelter, just a pressurized tin can out in the middle of nowhere. We did it as a supply mission. And once we took a bunch of pictures outside that are really cool. And then I took one inside, which I sent to them late. This is it. Is that better? Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so we finally took it inside this pressurized habitat, and this was after a pretty epic 3-hour drive. And I'm pretty sure that's Viper Check on the left and known miscreant Matt Lloyd on the right. I think that's it. Without question, I'm in the center because I have a much better fashion sense than they do. And we all look like triplets because we all have the same face. But in any event, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. One of the best times I've had. And there's some reason why I brought this up. I simply can't remember what it is. In any event, Free Frontier and space and all the rest of it, Elon Musk, all the rest. So yeah, I want to hit people while they're playing and all the rest of it. And that's why I've got things that are a little more immediately in front of me. As I've said before, the whole game is a stepping stone to the world of entertainment, and I really want to do it. All right, it's time for me to go. I've got a meeting downtown to see what we can do about this kerfluffle, and then I have to go home. Don't have to go home. Want to go home. So there we go. And that'll do it for the Stratosphere Lounge. Needless to say, I can't thank you enough for your support. You have no idea what it means to me personally. To have people that fly to your defense and are so sure of the kind of person I am that at times when even I was not sure about the kind of person I am. It's that kind of trauma for me, and I deeply appreciate it. I'll never forget it. So anyway, somebody from Dublin, is that right? That's awesome. In any event, that'll do it for the Stretch for Lunch today. I've got to get going. We're going to Phoenix tomorrow. Tucson tomorrow. And back on Friday? Saturday. All right, that'll do it. Thanks again, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for the support and the kind words. It really means an awful lot to me, and I need to be tougher about these things, and slowly but surely, I suppose I'm getting there. Until then, remember, watch what you say. This is America. I kind of wanted that to sound more like a joke, and it just didn't. But, if it wasn't a fight, it wouldn't be fun, right?